Something is happening right now, and most people never notice it. It is not a sound, not a thought, not something visible. It is subtler than that. Perhaps you have felt it before. That strange instant when everything seems to slow down. Nothing changes externally. The environment remains the same. People remain the same. Life continues exactly as it was. Yet something inside shifts. As if, for a brief moment, you stop being lost inside experience and begin observing experience itself. This moment is rare, and at the same time, it is where real transformation begins. Because throughout life, you were trained to believe you are the character of the story, that you think, that you decide, that you react, that you control. But look carefully. Did you choose your next thought before it appeared, or did it simply arise? Did you decide to feel exactly what you feel right now, or did the emotion arrive first? Thoughts appear, memories emerge, impulses arise, and almost instantly you assume, this is me. But perhaps this is the great silent confusion of human experience. Perhaps you are never what appears, but what notices appearance itself, and that difference changes everything. Because when you believe you are the thought, you live trapped inside it, but when you begin noticing the thought, something unexpected happens. Space appears, and within that space, something awakens. Most people spend their lives trying to change external reality. They change cities, relationships, routines, goals, identities, yet they keep encountering the same patterns, the same emotions, the same internal experiences, as if reality were following an invisible script. Maybe it is, not because the world repeats, but because the observer remains unchanged. Modern neuroscience suggests something fascinating. The brain does not directly perceive reality, it predicts reality. It constructs interpretations based on the past. It anticipates experience before awareness arrives, which means something profoundly unsettling. Much of what you call reality may simply be recognition of the familiar. You are not reacting to the present, you are reacting to expectation. So a silent question begins to emerge. If perception is constructed, who is noticing the construction? There exists a level of experience that does not react, does not judge, does not force, it simply observes. Perhaps you have felt it in simple moments. Watching the ocean, looking at the sky, walking without thinking about destination for a few seconds. The mind becomes quiet, and something remains, aware, present, alive, and strangely. In those moments, reality feels more real than ever, as if the world is seen without filters, without narrative, without past interference. Quantum physics touches this mystery unexpectedly. At the fundamental level of matter, particles exist as possibilities, not fixed objects. They remain potential, until observation occurs. Only then, a specific reality emerges. Not because something was magically created, but because observation participates in outcome. Now imagine applying this to human experience. What if psychological reality works in a similar way? What if what you repeatedly observe is what takes form? What if the observer is not merely a spectator, but an active participant? Perhaps awakening is not acquiring new knowledge. Perhaps it is recognizing the silent role that has always existed. Because there comes a moment, a very simple moment, when something shifts. You still think, still feel, still live, but you are no longer completely inside the mind. There is distance, silent clarity, presence without effort. And then an almost indescribable realization appears. You are not only living reality, you are witnessing how reality unfolds within consciousness. And in that instant, a new possibility emerges. If the observer changes, experience changes. If attention shifts, meaning shifts. If awareness awakens, the world feels different, not because the universe transformed, but because the observer finally awakened. Perhaps this is why external change alone never satisfies. People try to change the scene, without noticing who is watching the scene. And maybe something inside you is already beginning to recognize this. Maybe you are never meant to simply watch this video. Maybe something is remembering itself. And if that is true, we are approaching the most important point of this entire series. Because in the next moments, we will not only speak about the observer, we will explore what truly happens when it awakens, and why, from that moment forward, reality never feels the same again. Once something begins to be observed, a silent shift starts to occur, not immediately, not dramatically, and rarely consciously noticed. Yet something begins reorganizing within you. Perhaps you have already felt it. A subtle distance between you and your own thoughts. As if for the first time, there is enough space to notice what once felt automatic. Before, a thought appeared and became truth. An emotion arose and became identity. A reaction happened and felt inevitable. Now, something different occurs. The thought still appears, the emotion still arises. But there is a moment, a tiny interval, where you notice this is happening within me. And that moment changes everything, because for most of life the mind operated as an invisible autopilot. It learned patterns, created fast responses, built interpretations to protect you. The human brain was not designed to seek truth. It was designed to conserve energy, to survive, to predict. It prefers the familiar over the accurate, the known over the new, even when the familiar creates suffering. This is why people repeat emotional experiences. Different relationships, same feeling, new situations, same insecurity, external success, same inner emptiness. Not because something is wrong with you, but because the observer remained unconscious. The mind keeps solving the present, using memories from the past. It compares, judges, projects, anticipating threats that may no longer exist. And most fascinating of all, this happens before you become aware. Neuroscience research shows neural decisions begin milliseconds before conscious awareness recognizes them, meaning, the mind moves first, and awareness arrives afterward. For years, we believed consciousness was in control, but maybe it does not control, maybe it observes. And what if consciousness is not the commander, but the awakening of the observer? Then a deeper question appears. If thoughts arise by themselves, emotions emerge spontaneously, reactions begin before decision. Who is noticing all of this right now? There is something within you that has never changed. From childhood until today, your body changed, beliefs changed, stories changed, life phases passed. Yet a continuous sense remains. I am here. This silent presence does not age, does not react automatically, it simply witnesses. Perhaps you never lost this presence. Perhaps attention was simply absorbed by mental noise. Imagine watching a movie so immersive, you forget you are sitting in the theater. You laugh, cry, feel fear, feel joy, until suddenly you remember, it's just a movie. Nothing in the film changes, but your relationship to it changes completely. Life may work the same way. When the observer awakens, experience continues, but identification softens. Thoughts still arise, but they no longer dominate. Emotions still pass, but they no longer define you. And slowly, an unexpected peace begins to emerge. Not because problems disappeared, but because you are no longer fully inside them. Quantum physics suggests the observer influences observed outcomes, not through control, but through presence. Attention organizes probability. Focus stabilizes experience. What receives awareness gains psychological reality. And perhaps this is what almost no one realizes. You do not need to fight the mind. You do not need to silence thoughts by force. You do not need to become someone new. Awakening may begin simply when you realize you were never only what you thought you were. And in that realization, something begins happening naturally. You react less, observe more, breathe differently, listen more deeply. Life stops feeling like a sequence of problems, and starts feeling like a process unfolding before you. But something even deeper remains. Because recognizing the observer is only the beginning. The real shift happens when you understand what changes in reality, when observation itself changes. And perhaps, without realizing it, you are already entering that moment now. There is a curious moment in the awakening of consciousness, a nearly imperceptible shift, when you begin noticing something strange. Nothing external changes. The world remains the same. People keep speaking. Sounds continue. Thoughts still appear. Yet the way you experience all of it is no longer the same. Perhaps you have felt this. A moment when you watch a thought pass and realize you do not need to follow it. Before, thought pulled you. Now, you see thought moving. This difference is silent, yet revolutionary. For most of life, the mind convinced you that experience and identity were the same. If fear existed, you were fear. If anxiety appeared, you became anxious. If doubt arose, you became doubt itself. But when the observer begins to awaken, something unexpected happens. You realize experiences occur, yet they do not define the one who notices them. It feels as if a new layer of reality opens. A layer that was always present, but never recognized. Imagine the ocean at the surface. Constant waves, movement, turbulence, change. Yet, in the depths, the ocean remains silent, vast, stable, untouched by waves. For years, we lived only at the mental surface, reacting to every emotional wave, trying to control every movement of the mind, trying to organize thoughts as problems needing solutions. But perhaps transformation was never about controlling waves. Perhaps it was about realizing you are the ocean, not the surface. And when this realization begins, reality seems to slow down. Small moments appear. You hear someone speaking and notice the space between words. You walk and feel your feet touching the ground. You breathe, and for the first time notice breathing happening on its own. Presence changes quality. Psychological time softens. The past loses its grip. The future stops dominating, and the present begins expanding. Modern science is beginning to touch this mystery. Research shows much brain activity unfolds without conscious identity involvement. The body breathes by itself. The heart beats on its own. Perception arises before interpretation. Consciousness does not create experience, it witnesses it. And here a profound realization appears. Perhaps the sense of I control everything was never accurate. Perhaps human suffering comes not from experience, but from the constant attempt to control what is already happening. Observe for a moment. How many thoughts appeared today without your choice? How many emotions arose uninvited? How many memories surfaced spontaneously? If all of this happens effortlessly, who is trying to control? Then something fascinating begins to emerge. When the observer awakens, effort decreases. You do not need to stop thoughts. They naturally slow. You do not need to search for silence. Silence begins appearing between thoughts, like spaces between musical notes, invisible pauses sustaining the melody of existence. And within these spaces, something deeply human emerges. Clarity, not intellectual clarity, felt clarity. A sense that life does not need solving, only living. Perhaps this is why nature feels peaceful. The ocean does not try to be different. The sky does not resist clouds. The forest does not fight the wind. Everything allows movement. And the awakened observer functions the same way. It does not fight experience. It allows. And paradoxically, this allowance transforms reality. Because when internal resistance disappears, the mind stops generating conflict. Situations still happen. Challenges still exist. But something fundamental changes. You are no longer dragged by experience. You witness it. And in that state, decisions arise more clearly. Relationships shift naturally. Responses appear without struggle. Intuition becomes stronger. Not because something mystical occurred, but because noise diminished. Perhaps reality was never confusing. Perhaps we were simply looking through an overactive mind. When the observer awakens, perception widens. You begin noticing invisible patterns, synchronicities, subtle signals, moments previously ignored. And slowly, life stops feeling like something happening against you, and starts feeling like something unfolding with you. But an even deeper question remains. If observation changes experience, what happens when the observer itself transforms? And perhaps, the next stage of awakening begins exactly there. There comes a moment in the awakening process, when something deeply personal occurs. It is no longer just an idea, no longer a reflection. It becomes direct perception. You begin noticing that what you always called my life may never have been entirely personal. Look carefully. For years, identity was built from stories, accumulated experiences, repeated memories, inherited expectations, labels received before self-discovery ever began. You learned who you should be before discovering who you were. Slowly, without noticing, you began living inside a mental narrative, a narrative saying, "This is who I am, I've always been this way, this is my personality." But when the observer awakens, that narrative becomes transparent. It does not disappear instantly, but it loses solidity. Like watching a film while knowing it is a film, emotions still arise, characters still speak, the story continues unfolding, yet something in you is no longer completely inside it. Perhaps you have felt this. A moment when you react less than before, an emotion appears, yet no longer dominates experience. Conflict arises, but no longer defines your inner state. And in that moment, something extraordinary emerges. Space. Space between stimulus and reaction. Space between thought and identity. Space between experience and the one who notices, and this space changes everything. Because for most of life, the mind operated automatically. Stimulus gives reaction, memory gives behavior, emotion gives decision. No pause, no awareness, no real choice. But the awakening observer introduces something new, an invisible pause, and within that pause, freedom appears. Not freedom to control the world, but freedom from being completely controlled by conditioning. Perhaps freedom never meant doing whatever you want. Perhaps freedom means noticing before reacting. Noticing before believing, noticing before repeating old patterns. And here reality begins to change. Not because the external world instantly transforms, but because the relationship with reality shifts. Situations that once created anxiety now appear as events. Thoughts once experienced as absolute truths now appear as passing phenomena. The observer realizes something radical. Experience happens within consciousness, not the other way around. This reverses our understanding of existence. For so long we believed, the world creates my experience, but perhaps the opposite is closer to truth. The way we observe organizes what we perceive. Quantum physics hints at something similar. Before observation, multiple possibilities exist simultaneously. Observation does not create reality, but selects experienced outcomes. Human consciousness may function in a comparable way. Each moment contains countless potential responses: anger, understanding, fear, curiosity, resistance, acceptance. The awakened observer recognizes it is not obligated to follow the first impulse. Choice exists, not at the origin of thought, but in the continuation of experience. And slowly, the world begins reflecting this internal shift. Conversations change, decisions simplify, conflict decreases. Synchronicities appear more frequently, not because reality magically changed, but because perception stopped filtering everything through automatic fear. Perhaps reality has always responded to presence, and when presence changes, experience changes with it. A quiet question emerges. If you lived identified with thoughts for so long, who is living now? If emotions come and go, who remains? If personal stories evolve across life, what has never changed? There is something within you, present in childhood, present in adolescence, present now, something that never aged, never altered, never touched by mental narratives. The observer, and perhaps awakening, is not acquiring something new. Perhaps it is recognizing what was always here, always observing, always silent, always present. Yet an even deeper layer remains, because recognizing the observer is only the beginning. The real transformation happens when you realize the observer also transforms what it observes. And it is precisely here that reality begins responding differently. Something curious begins to happen when the observer remains awake for longer periods. Nothing dramatic changes, and precisely because of that, most people do not notice immediately. Life continues, people keep talking, days keep passing, yet internally, something stops feeling heavy. Perhaps you have felt this without knowing how to explain it. A subtle distance from your own worries, a quiet sense of silence even amid activity, as if a part of you were simply watching, and for the first time, not trying to control everything. For so long we believed living meant reacting, responding quickly, defending identities, solving everything immediately. But when the observer awakens, a new way of existing begins to emerge. You realize not every thought needs a response. Not every emotion needs resolution. Not every situation requires intervention, and something unexpected happens. The mind begins slowing down naturally, not because you forced it, but because you stopped feeding it continuously. Consider this. How many thoughts appear daily, only because they receive automatic attention? How many worries persist simply because they were repeated countless times? The mind learns through repetition. For years, repetition was unconscious, but now something has shifted. You notice thoughts before following them, emotions before reacting, impulses before acting, and within this small space, a deep sense of belonging emerges. Perhaps suffering never came only from circumstances, but from constant identification with mental movement. When identification softens, the weight softens as well, not because problems disappeared, but because you stopped carrying them as your identity. And something even more interesting unfolds. You become more present. Conversations feel more real. Simple moments gain depth. The wind feels noticeable. Silence feels alive. Nature feels closer, as if life had always been happening, but the busy mind prevented noticing. Perhaps awakening adds nothing to experience. Perhaps it removes excess interpretation, excess anticipation, excess resistance. And when excess fades, a forgotten quality returns. Presence. Not an idealized presence, but a simple one. Breathing without thinking about breathing, looking without immediate analysis, listening without preparing internal replies. And in this state, something deeply human emerges. You realize you were never separate from experience. Separation was mental, a story built from the need for control. But when the observer remains, life no longer feels like something happening against you. It begins to feel like something happening with you. And perhaps for the first time, there is trust. Not certainty-based trust, but trust rooted in the realization that you can observe any experience without losing yourself inside it. This transforms your relationship with fear. Fear may arise, but it does not dominate. Anxiety may appear, but it does not define. Doubt may exist, but it does not paralyze. because something deeper sustains experience, the observer. At this stage many people notice something surprising, a sense of familiarity, as if returning home, not to a physical place, but to an inner state always available. Perhaps you spent years trying to become someone better, when the real movement was simply stopping the escape from the observer itself. There is a silent relief in this recognition. You do not need to fix everything immediately. You do not need to understand everything now. You do not need to transform into an ideal version of yourself, because the observer is already whole. It does not need improvement, only recognition, and the more this recognition deepens, the more reality appears to respond differently. Situations that once drained energy pass. Thoughts that once dominated move through. The external world continues moving, yet internally there is stability, not rigid stability, but living stability, flexible, silent, and perhaps this is the true beginning of reality changing. Not changing what happens, but changing who is present when it happens. And when this occurs, something even deeper emerges, a quiet curiosity, a feeling that more is waiting to be seen, more to be perceived, more to be understood without effort, as if life itself begins revealing layers once hidden by mental urgency. And then a nearly invisible realization appears, yet deeply transformative. Perhaps you were never lost. Perhaps you were only distracted. There is a rare moment, almost invisible, when something permanently changes in how reality is perceived. Nothing external happens, no dramatic sign, no supernatural event, and yet everything reorganizes. Because what changes is not the world, it is the point from which you are looking. For most of life, attention was directed toward what appears. Thoughts, emotions, situations, problems, desires, memories. You learned to believe that living meant continuously following mental movement, as if the mind were the center of existence. But there is something almost no one notices. The mind was never the center, it was always movement. The true center is that which perceives movement, and when this understanding becomes experiential rather than intellectual, something deeply liberating occurs. Notice now, before any thought arises, there is space. Before the next emotion appears, there is silence. Before the next reaction, there is presence. This space has always been here, it never disappeared. It never needed to be created, it was simply overlooked, because attention was busy trying to fix experience instead of perceiving it. Perhaps awakening is not gaining something new, but recognizing what never left. And when this recognition happens, an unexpected perception emerges. Reality is not fixed, not solid, not as definitive as it once seemed. Because what you call reality has always been shaped by how it is observed. Quantum physics reveals something fascinating. Particles exist as probabilities until observation occurs. Observation does not create the universe, but determines which possibility manifests. Perhaps human experience works similarly. Your life has always been a field of possibilities, yet conditioned attention repeated familiar patterns, the same fears, the same stories, the same interpretations, not because they were absolute truths, but because they felt familiar. Now imagine observing without the automatic filter of the past, without anticipation, without defense, without projection. Perception shifts immediately. The same environment feels different. The same conversation gains new meaning. Silence no longer feels empty, but alive. Because the awakened observer does not control reality, it allows reality to reveal deeper layers, and here the true shift happens. Perhaps you were never trapped by circumstances, perhaps only by perception. When perception changes, the world responds, not magically, not as an external miracle, but as the natural consequence of less contracted awareness. Notice something. When resistance disappears, energy once used to fight experience becomes clarity. Clarity creates different choices. Different choices create different paths, and suddenly reality appears changed. But perhaps, the observer changed, and that changes everything. The awakened observer no longer lives reacting, it lives perceiving. It chooses where attention rests, and attention is the direction of reality. Where attention rests, experience organizes itself. If attention rests in fear, the world feels threatening. If attention rests in presence, the world opens. Perhaps human power was never control, but conscious perception. You begin noticing subtle synchronicities, unexpected alignments, paths unfolding naturally, not because reality was manipulated, but because resistance stopped blocking experience. Life was always moving. The observer simply returned to participation, and then the deepest question emerges. If you are not your thoughts, not your emotions, not your stories, who is living your life right now? Feel that question. Do not answer immediately. Let it echo, because the answer may not arrive as thought. It may arrive as silence. Living silence. Conscious presence. And within that silence, something becomes clear. You do not need to reach awakening. You only need to stop ignoring the observer that was always here. And when this stabilizes, reality feels lighter, less urgent, less threatening. Because what you truly are cannot be harmed by passing thoughts. And then something extraordinary happens. You stop trying to awaken, and realize you were already awake. Perhaps, as you reached this moment, something quiet shifted within you. Not a conclusion, not a final answer, but a subtle feeling, as if something slowed down, as if for a few moments, the mind no longer needed to rush. Throughout this series, the intention was never to teach a technique, nor to convince you of an idea. The intention was simpler, to create space, a space where you could observe, without effort, who you truly are behind the constant movement of thought. And maybe now you notice something interesting. Nothing new was added to you. No special ability appeared. No secret knowledge was delivered. Yet something feels different. Because awakening is not becoming someone else. It is recognizing what never stopped being present. For a long time, you may have believed change would happen when external life changed, when circumstances improved, when thoughts became perfect, when the future finally arrived. But a silent inversion is happening now. Life does not change first. Perception changes first, and then, the world begins to feel different, not because reality obeys you, but because the observer stopped resisting experience. Perhaps this is the true meaning of awakening, not control, not escape, not conquest, but conscious participation in existence, noticing thoughts arise, without needing to follow them, feeling emotions pass, without becoming them, watching life unfold, without losing the silent center that was always present. And when this happens, something deeply human returns. Lightness, curiosity, presence. You begin living less in the past, less in the future, and more in the only place experience truly exists, here now. Perhaps the awakened observer does not see a different world. Perhaps it sees the same world, without the weight of old interpretations. And that changes everything. Because when perception changes, relationships change, choices change, paths change, not by force, but as the natural consequence of expanded awareness. If this journey carried one message, it is this: you were never separate from what you were searching for. The silence you were seeking was always observing through you. Maybe that is why certain words resonated, certain pauses felt meaningful, certain moments felt strangely familiar. It was not coincidence. It was recognition of something already yours. Now, the series comes to an end, but observation continues. Because awakening does not happen in a video. It happens in ordinary moments. In the space between thoughts, between reaction and choice. In the silence that appears when you simply notice. Perhaps the real question was never, how do I change reality? But who is observing all of this? Take that question with you, not to answer quickly, but to feel, to explore, to live. If this journey resonated with you, write one single word in the comments. A word that represents your state right now. Presence, silence, clarity, awareness, awakening. Do not overthink it. Just write it, and notice what happens inside you. If this space resonated with you, subscribe to the channel. Here we continue exploring consciousness, perception, and reality. Not as theory, but as lived experience. And if you arrived through this video, you may want to watch the entire series from the beginning. Each episode reveals another hidden layer of the mind, leading to this moment. Grateful to walk this path with you. Much light on your journey.